name is Christabel, and I'm an academic advisor for the TRIO Student Support Services program, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's Wolf Talk. The speaker series focuses on self-identity, humanity, and hidden history. It's sponsored by TRIO Student Support Services, student involvement in leadership, and held in conjunction with our common read book, Salt to the Sea. Our speaker today is Sarah Meade, Direct Service Worker for Lutheran Social Services of South Dakota in the Center for New Americans. She works in the Aberdeen office assisting refugees, secondary migrants, and other immigrants in our community. Her position with the Center for New Americans involves working directly with refugee and immigrant individuals and families to assist with eligibility determination, employment services, medical case management, housing assistance, English language class referral, and community resource referral. She also provides orientation to clients involving life in the U.S. Sarah works with community agencies and groups to coordinate services for her clients and offers support to the community as needed. Sarah has been employed with LSS since January 2017. Previously, she worked in the areas of child and family welfare, adoption, early Head Start, and services with people with disabilities. Sarah received her Bachelor of Social Work degree from Brigham Young University in 2009 and her Master's of Social Work from Arizona State University in 2011. Our common read book, Salt to the Sea, sheds light on World War II refugees. Abandoned or separated from their families, they were forced to battle the beast of war on their own, left with an inheritance of heartache and responsibility for events they had no role in causing. Please help me welcome Sarah Meade.
Is this working okay? Yeah? Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here with you. As Krista explained, I work for Lutheran Social Services, and particularly with refugees and immigrants in our community. And so I'm just here to talk to you a little bit today about refugees specifically. We're going to talk a little bit about how people become refugees and their situation, as well as the process of them coming to the United States and how we at LSS serve them once they're here. So first of all, it's good to understand kind of the terms, the ways of identifying different immigrants in the United States. An immigrant itself is just a person who comes to a country to take up permanent residence. So, you know, they may come over for education or for a job or for, you know, they have family here or whatever, and that's a process in and of itself. There are many ways to come as an immigrant to the United States. A refugee, on the other hand, is a person who's been persecuted because of his or her race, religion, nationality, or membership in a social or political group. Because of that persecution, the person has to flee from their home country, and they're not able to return home. So it's kind of a situation where they're forced out of their home and forced to live somewhere else. Just a few other things. An internationally displaced person is someone who's been forced to flee, but they stay within their home country. They just move to a different area. So they haven't crossed any international borders. And then an asylum seeker is someone who seeks safety from persecution or harm outside of their own country. And so, you know, they may, for example, someone coming to the United States may come here with a visa of some sort, and once they're in the United States, they're going to seek asylum because of persecution they've received in their home country. So it's a little bit different than a refugee, but a similar situation because it is involving that persecution. So just something to think about as we talk about, I'm going to show you some pictures, and we're going to talk about kind of the situation here with refugees. It's good to kind of put yourself in their shoes, and I know some of you have read this book, and I imagine that, you know, that's something that you do as you read, trying to understand what people who have been kicked out of their homes, basically, what they feel and what they go through. But think about right now, if right now someone told you, you know, someone has set your house on fire, or there's these people coming with guns and you need to leave now. And like, what would you do? What would you grab? Where would you go? If you had to say goodbye to your family, would you be able to do it? And where do you think you would go to start again if you couldn't be in this country anymore? So here's just a few pictures of individuals fleeing from their homes. Sometimes they go by water, sometimes they go by land, sometimes they travel hundreds of miles for days on foot just to get to a place of safety. Many times as refugees, they go to a refugee camp, which will usually be at a neighboring country, but if they live in the middle of their country, that's going to be a big trip. And when they're undeveloped countries, they don't necessarily have a car or transportation to get there, so they walk in order to stay safe. And even children, are having to make these long treks. So here's just a few other pictures of individuals who have fled. To get an idea of the population right now of refugees in the world, by the end of 2016, the UN estimated a total of 22.5 million refugees in the world. And then in addition to that, another 43.1 million people have been displaced, so needing to leave their homes whether or not they actually left their country. So that's a total of 65.6 million people who have been displaced from their homes over the last year. That's 20 people every minute, which is a lot. 51% of these individuals are children. 55% came from just 3 countries, Syria, Afghanistan, and South Sudan. And 84% are hosted in developing regions. And here are some examples of those regions. And so you think, these neighboring countries, they're just, developing. They don't have all the conveniences and things that we have, and suddenly they have this influx of people coming and seeking refuge in their home, in their land, and they don't necessarily have the governmental means to support those needs. And so it can be a real strain on these other countries that are trying to help, but don't necessarily have the resources to help very effectively. And that's how you end up with these refugee camps. So really quickly, just to talk about where these refugees come from, the majority are going to come from 3 different areas. We have the Middle East. They're going to come from Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. Those that are assigned to South Dakota tend to only be from Afghanistan or Iraq. We don't tend to get any from Syria. And then here's a picture of a camp in the Middle East. This camp is called Zardi Refugee Camp in Jordan. And at its height, this was home to 156,000 refugees. As of May 2017, it was down to about 80,000 refugees. So that's a nice decrease, but that's still so many people that are, you look, it looks like a town, but unfortunately it's not a developed town with people working, and, you see it's kind of a desert. There's not, food just naturally provided there. It's not developed, so it's not the best place to be. There's others that come from Southeast Asia. They are from Bhutan and from Burma or Myanmar. It's called both. And we here in Aberdeen have a lot of refugees from Myanmar, Burma, particularly the Karen population. They come from this part of the world, and typically they end up in refugee camps in Thailand, just on the border there. So just a little information on some of the refugees in our own community here. Here's a picture of one of the camps there. And then in Africa, most refugees come from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Eritrea, Sudan, South Sudan, and Somalia. And again, that's another population that we have a large group of here in Aberdeen, is the Somali population. This picture here is of the world's largest refugee camp in Dadaab, Kenya, and its population is nearly 400,000. So I've heard it compared to like the size of New Orleans. So not small, it's large, very, very large, but obviously not developed anything like New Orleans. So This is people living in, makeshift homes, tents, anything they can do to, find shelter and survive. In refugee camps, just to kind of get an idea of what it's like there are rough conditions, okay? People are living on dirt floors. Usually they're given like maybe a little bit of wood or some leaves or some different things to build their own home. They have to do it on their own, and they go and build it. And maybe sometimes, and this isn't necessarily the case in all the camps, but sometimes they'll be given like a yearly something to fix up their house a little bit because the weather has destroyed their roof or things like that. But it's nothing, basically they're living in huts or tents. They have little opportunity for work. Often they're not allowed to work if they're going to be receiving like rations from some of the charity organizations. Many times the hosting country doesn't want these refugees working within their community, and so these refugee camps aren't like in the middle of their city. It's going to be kind of on the border of the country, and then the cities are within. And so they don't want refugees coming and working, and so they're not allowed to. They're allowed to stay there as long as they don't leave and work. And so even if they want to, they can't really do that, which is difficult. And sometimes they will, they have needs that aren't necessarily provided to them. And so I'll show you some pictures in a few minutes of the food rations and that sort of thing that they get. But often they'll take those food rations and they will trade it for things that they need, like shoes, clothes, underwear. Maybe they'll trade it for meat because they're not getting meat or fruit, so they can have a little bit of something other than the rice and just those basic things that they're receiving. And so one person said, basically the cost of clothing to them, or the cost of a blanket, the cost of diapers for their child is starvation. They have to starve to have those things. And so even though many things are, they're given food and they don't have to work for it, many of them would like to work, I'm sure, in replacement of what they're actually experiencing. Also education. There are schools within the refugee camps, but as you can imagine, there's not necessarily the resources to teach the way that the children need to be taught, and so we'll see pictures of that as well. But the conditions where they're learning aren't good, and then the education that they're getting is not the highest level. So, and many times, it's a privilege to go to school. For them, not everybody is able to go. Most of the refugees I've interacted with, they talk that they've went to school through 6th grade maybe, or 8th grade, and some not even that far. And I don't know if I've ever talked to one that's actually completed their education. So it's something that can be really challenging because they want to be progressing and doing something, but they're just kind of stuck there. Obviously, also healthcare is an issue. Having, a clinic to go to if they're ill, or if someone needs surgery, these sorts of things that's not readily available to them. And so many people die in refugee camps, and that is a whole other, issue there. They are buried there in the camps. And here it says 75% remain for 5+ years, and the average length of displacement is 17 years. I've met a number of people who were born in refugee camps, and then they come to the United States as their first ever, normal civilization, I guess you could say. They come in their 20s or 30s, and that's all they've ever known. And so people stay there for a long time. And so here's a picture of just some food rations people are receiving. And then here again, a truckload's coming and the people all gather around. It's kind of first come, first serve. You get what you can get. And here they're cooking. It looks like rice. But again, their homes don't have kitchens, so they all cook outside. And, this is kind of what they have. Here's a shelter, and then it looks like they've each put together their own little tents or sleeping quarters. And then here's another picture of outside. This is in a school. You can see these kids in the front row. They're sitting on rocks. They don't even have the place for everyone to sit. But they provide what they're able to. And here's another one outside. So what happens is these individuals, they flee and they go to a refugee camp. And they're in the refugee camp, and eventually they decide, or they ask to be resettled in a third country. Many times refugees, they don't want to leave their home, right? Home is home, and they're hopeful that there will eventually be peace in their land and they can return, but the truth is that doesn't often happen. It's not typical. And so eventually they decide to be resettled somewhere else where they can start a new life. There are 37 countries resettled, 189,000, sorry guys, and 300 refugees in 2016. And so the United States, of course, is one of those countries, but that is less than 1% of the refugees worldwide. So that's just a tiny, tiny portion of the total refugees in the world that are able to have opportunity to move beyond that point. So this is kind of where a lot of people have questions about, the process of refugees coming to the United States, the security measures that are taken, how, rigorous is that screening. But it is important to understand that refugees undergo the most rigorous screening of anyone admitted into the United States. It's much easier to get a visa. It's much easier to come for other purposes. But as a refugee, it can take from 18 months to 2 years on average. And sometimes it takes much more than that because they are very screened in depth. And if there is at any point a doubt on whether or not that applicant poses a security threat, they will not be admitted. Their case will be denied, and that will be that. So it's important to understand that that precautions are taken in that sense. So this is just, I'm going to try to just skim over this, but this is a rundown of refugee entry into the United States. So in the beginning, a refugee is going to say, I want to apply to go, to another country. They can request a certain country, but that doesn't mean that's where they're going to be placed. It's more common if they have family members in the United States that they'll be sent to the United States versus, Australia or Europe or wherever. So, so they go to the UN refugee office and they say, I want to be resettled somewhere. Then all of their identifying documents are collected at that point, and they do an initial assessment and interview. They find out all their information that they can get, birth date, birthplace, marriage date, how many children they have, names of everybody, lots of relative information. Populations in the Middle East, especially Syrians, are their assessment is more in depth. They do an iris scan on them, so there's just an extra step there. And then there's this interview. And so what happens in this process is these interviews are taken and then more agencies assess the information. And if there's any sort of question or problem or discrepancy, they're either going to be denied or their process will start all over again. They'll have another interview and they'll do it over again. If everything's fine, they move on. And at that point, they're sent to the Resettlement Support Center where more identifying documents are collected. It's kind of a really repetitive process. But the applicant file is created and then they start compiling information to do a more checks. So once they get to this point, the U.S. security agencies all screen the candidate, okay? So it's not just one group interviewing these people and checking their background, but we have the National Counterterrorism Center, intelligence community, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the State Department. They each do separate checks because they each have different databases and different information, and so they're each going to do a check on this individual. And then at that point, if everything checks out and everything matches and everything's good, they keep going. But it's looking for things like if they are a security risk, if they are related to anyone that's a security risk. So if your uncle, is part of this political party and has caused some problems in the past, then, and we see that as a threat in the United States, then you could be denied because of a relative, even if you're not associated. And so, any of those connections are assessed and determinations are made from there. Also, anyone with outstanding warrants, criminal violations, that sort of thing. So they review all of this, and if there are any problems, they either are denied or they start the process over again and do the checks all over again. And so you can see this can take a long time if anyone has any tiny thing. And this can be like they spelled their name differently on 2 different applications, or just simple things that could even just be like a mistake, can cause the process to take much longer. And then they continue on to the Department of Homeland Security. If everything's checking out okay so far, they're going to be interviewed again by USCIS officers who've been specially trained specifically to do these interviews. And then they do fingerprinting as well at this point. If there are questions or red flags at all here, again, it'll be revisited. Otherwise, they can continue on. And then these fingerprints are all analyzed and checked against all these different databases. At this point, this is the end point. If there's still red flags, they're done. Otherwise, they can continue on. They have a medical check, and the medical screening, is going to determine if they have any major health concerns that might be spread to a new country, as well as their ability to travel and that sort of thing, if they have any serious conditions that would prevent them being able to travel. And then, finally, they're given cultural orientation, so they learn a little bit about the culture where they're going, so that hopefully they'll come and be able to assimilate a little better. And assessment is made by a non-governmental organization to decide where they should go within the United States. And so this organization would then, determine based on where their family is, or if they don't have family, based on where their cultural population might be residing. Because having that support system built in wherever they go is helpful. Imagine going to a new country where nobody even knew what it was like to be in the United States, or no one had lived there before. You would feel a lot more out of place than if you go somewhere where there's a bunch of people from the United States living there, and you at least have a little support, someone who can speak your language and tell you where to go for things and what to do. And then also health can be a determining factor of where someone is chosen to go. Again, even once they've been basically approved to go, until the day that they travel, these checks continue to be done. There's still people assessing their information, and if anything pops up, we're going to go back to square one, or we're going to just deny the application. And by we, I don't mean like my organization, just the United States. So then their travel is booked, and this travel is paid for, but they pay back their travel costs. Okay, they receive a loan, and then they're required to pay it back when they first come to the United States, once they're employed and are able to do so. And then again, they have more screening from U.S. Customs, Border Protection, and the TSA as well. So again, they're still going through this process. And then finally, if everything is good, they arrive in the United States. Eventually, a year after they arrive, they're required to apply for a green card. And again, at that point, more checks are done on them, okay? So even a year after they arrive, they're still being watched, they're still being assessed, there's still an opportunity for them to be sent back, honestly, if there are problems. So I want to talk for a minute specifically about direct resettlement in South Dakota and in Aberdeen. So we do not currently have direct resettlement in South Dakota. Direct resettlement means that's their first placement when they arrive in the United States. So Sioux Falls is the only city in South Dakota that currently receives refugees and settles them within their community. Aberdeen is not a direct resettlement site. But I want to just kind of explain to you that process that they go through to decide who comes in and what happens. So Lutheran Social Services is the resettlement agency for South Dakota. So any refugees that come from another country here to the United States, well, here to South Dakota, will come through Lutheran Social Services. And it's our responsibility to make sure that they are orientated correctly and that they have the needs met, and that they are placed somewhere suitable. And so, but they don't decide by themselves. LSS doesn't, we don't decide by ourselves who comes in. It's a community discussion. And so stakeholders are all going to come together, and this is going to include schools, it's going to include the police department, DSS, the state government, so the governor is going to be involved in this. And medical providers, all these people come together and they have a discussion on, and it's actually a few months long discussion, so it's not just like one discussion, but they talk about the numbers that are projected to come in and whether or not they have the ability to support that number of individuals coming in. And they talk about the ethnic groups that are coming in and whether or not they have the ability to support those ethnic groups. Whether it be, interpreters or whatever needs are there. And then they do historical comparisons from previous years. They it's a deep discussion, and what happens is, like, for example, let's say that they approach the school district is there, and they're saying, or the school districts, however many are covered, they say, we're going to have this many people coming in this year. It's more than previously, and the school district might say, we don't have the resources to provide English classes for those students. We don't have enough support. We either need more money or we need fewer people. And so then the discussion will continue until either grants are applied for and that money is received, or they will end up lowering the number. So, and that happens with each agency. There kind of has to be an okay from everybody on the numbers, on the individuals that are coming in. And let me just see if there's anything else important. So then once that assessment is made, that determination is made, we have a projected number, we submit a report to LIRS, which is Lutheran Immigration Resource Services, and they're kind of the agency above us, and then they submit a report to the Department of State for approval. Once approved, this isn't revisited for that year unless there ends up being a greater than 10% increase in the number of people that come. So if they project a certain number and then more than 10% more come, then it's going to be revisited to make sure those resources are in place. So again, that number that's decided on is just a projection, and it can vary a little bit around that. So let's see. In the past, about 400 refugees were resettled to South Dakota each year. But this coming year, it's been cut in half to 200. So we're receiving a lot fewer. So to kind of understand a little bit better what happens here in Aberdeen, because I'm sure you can look around and see that we do have refugees here in Aberdeen. But these are all, I talked about in the beginning, secondary migrants. These are people who have been in the United States for a period of time. They've been resettled in another location, and they have heard that there's jobs here, or maybe they have family or friends here. And so they decide, I'm going to move to Aberdeen, South Dakota. And that's how they end up here. We don't directly resettle people here. So anyone who does move here, they move here on their own accord. And they make that choice, just like I made the choice to move to Aberdeen, South Dakota a little over a year ago. So it's the same thing. And they can come from all over the nation. So I'm going to talk a little bit real quick about the services that we specifically offer at Lutheran Social Services. And then when I'm done with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys might have. So this is basically a new refugee coming in. All refugees are eligible for services from LSS from their date of arrival in the U.S. through 5 years. And those services are going to start with orientation. So they're going to come to the United States, and if you think about these individuals, they live in these poor conditions in the refugee camps, and they come here, and we have indoor plumbing, and we have stoves, and we have air conditioning, and lots of things that they are not accustomed to that can actually be kind of complicated if you haven't always had that in your life. And so we do very thorough orientations within the first 24 hours of them moving into their home. We talk about, hot versus cold water and how to turn it on. We talk about what food needs to go in the refrigerator versus the freezer versus the cupboard. We talk about how to use the stove and the oven, and how to make sure you use the right things on the stove or in the oven, no plastic or things that, can cause problems, and also, of course, educating them on safety, so making sure, things are turned off after you're done using them. We cover with them how to turn on their air conditioning, how to turn it off, and their heating system, and teach them about how that costs money to do that, and so to not run it all the time. And we've had clients in the past who, you go into their home in the middle of winter and they're all bundled up because they don't know how to turn on their heater. There's a problem there. Obviously, these people need to be educated a little better. So we really try to cover all those bases. What can go in the washing machine? What can flush down the toilet? Like really anything you can think of. We go through step by step in their home and teach them those safety precautions and teach them how to use their home, teach them how to call 911, teach them how to use a phone, things that we probably don't even think twice about. It's a learning process for them. In addition to this housing orientation that we do, we have a 15 topic orientation that we do over a course of usually about 15 weeks, where they learn about living in the United States. So they're going to learn about their specific community and the resources available there, but they're also going to learn about U.S. laws, and they're going to learn about safety, they're going to learn about hygiene, keeping their home clean, transportation, just really all the basic information you need for survival. How do you go to the bank and open a bank account? And that's something we also take them to do if they need that resource. And then we teach them how to apply for a job, and we go, help them apply for jobs, and we and help them know how to interview for a job. Just all these things that they're going to need to survive here, because the purpose of our services is not to hold their hand and do everything for them. The purpose is to help them be self-sufficient. And so that is our main goal. And so we're going to work with them and teach them everything we can so that they can get on their own feet and move on and live their life without us. And that's, that's success, when they can move on and they can take care of themselves. We do offer, for their first 8 months in the United States, we offer cash assistance. They come to the United States, work eligible. but they still have to have certain documentation in order to start working, like a Social Security card and state ID card. And they don't just like go in and walk into the Social Security office and get that card. It can take a few months, and then they have to go get their state ID card. And so even though they are actually technically eligible to work because they've had all their background checks done already, they can't actually work until they have those documents in hand. So it's going to take some time. And so we don't want them to be living on the streets because they're not able to work even though they're ready and willing. And so we provide them with very small amounts of funding to basically pay their rent. We help connect them with DSS to get food stamps and Medicaid for that period of time. And then once they either get a job or that 8 months is reached, whichever comes first, their cash assistance is terminated and they are able to support themselves by getting a job. And so our first big push when they come is going to be for them to learn English because they can't really work yet. And so they're required to go to English classes for that time that they're receiving cash assistance. If they don't go to their classes, they don't get their money. It's basically their job is to go learn English as best they can with the time that they have. And then as soon as they're able, they need to apply for jobs. They need to get a job. And of course, we encourage them to continue learning English after that. But at that point, working and providing for themselves and not living off the system, living off of other people is going to be the goal. And so we want them to continue to learn English when they're able, but many of these people work many, many hours of the day, more than a normal shift potentially, even multiple jobs sometimes. And so it can take a little bit longer for them to learn English, but I can promise you that most of them want to. They work hard to. We also have immigration services, so we have a group of attorneys down in Sioux Falls that assist with applying for green cards, applying for citizenship, and trying to help their family reunite with them, that sort of thing. And we have community interpreter services that I don't know what I would do without them because that is how I'm able to communicate with the majority of my clients, and they're able to work with the individuals in our community and provide those interpretation services, both for LSS as well as they go to medical offices and courts and the WIC program and things like that, and they also spend their time interpreting in those situations to help these individuals and families. So that's pretty much it. That is what I do, is basically this page right here. I'm not involved in the process of them coming to the United States, but once they're here, my job is to help them know what they're doing and to help them be self-sufficient. And the goal is for them to be able to move on and carry on with their lives and be successful here in the United States. So what questions do you guys have? Is there anything that I can assist with? Yeah. Mm-hmm. How what? Sorry. Yeah. So there's a government agency that before they ever come to the United States, they have to sign a paper, like we would for a loan, with it all explained what they have to pay back. And they're able to make payments just like we would, many of you are probably getting student loans. So when you're done with school, you're going to make payments until it's all paid off, and it's the exact same kind of a system. They receive regular notification of what they owe, and they're expected to pay a certain amount. If they don't, it's going to affect their credit. Just like if you don't pay back your student loans, it's going to affect your credit, your ability to buy a house or a car, or, it can affect the ability to, with financial things. And also importantly, they have to, anytime they move, they have to report that to the government. And if they don't, and then they go to apply for their green card or citizenship, and there's discrepancies on where they've lived, they haven't reported certain things, that's going to cause some problems for them. And so we help them understand that they need to be reporting those things. And if they are reporting those things, they'll continue to receive, their notices of what they owe, and they pay them back. So, yeah. Someone else have a question over here? Yeah.
I have a couple of things, but you said the number of refugees coming in South Dakota this year is cut in half as
Well, there's multiple things. I know that obviously the amount coming into the United States has declined, and so that means in each resettlement site there's going to be fewer coming in. But again, I'm not quite sure because I'm not part of that process, but some of it also could be influenced by the community stakeholders, again, because Sioux Falls is the only site that does resettle. You know, the strain can be heavy on them, and so if they've had a ton come in last year, maybe they can't support as many the next year. So I think it's a mix between both. But you know, I don't. I'm sorry. I don't have numbers other than what's here. Yeah.
About like travel. It's like when you went to you know, South Dakota weather. I mean,
That transportation is, I would say, the number one, maybe number two problem, difficulty, barrier here in Aberdeen. It's very difficult. Yeah, when the weather gets cold, many of them, they find people to ride to work with. One person has their license in a car, and as many people as can go with them do. They use the ride line transportation system. But even that is, you know, it gets full and can be difficult with the language barrier as well. So many of them use the taxi service, which can be very, very expensive when you're going to work every day and paying, you know, $8 round trip just to get to and from work, or more, maybe a little less, who knows. But, you know, that adds up, and that takes a lot of your income. So transportation is definitely an issue, and one that I'm glad you brought that up, actually, one that we're trying to resolve. So I meant to mention this, but something that I do here in Aberdeen, I'm the only caseworker for the Center for New Americans here in Aberdeen, and so I try to be very involved with the community, and so there is a coalition that's here in Aberdeen called the Aberdeen Area Diversity Coalition. We meet twice a month, and it is our community stakeholders here. So it includes people from DSS, Department of Labor, churches in the community, the ESL programs in the community, Salvation Army, just a lot of different groups who work with this population. And we come together for an hour-and-a-half meeting every 2 weeks, and we talk about these sorts of things. And this is a hot topic for us right now, is transportation. How are we going to help these people to be able to do the things they need to do? How are we going to help them? And you know, even getting kids to school is a really big problem because there's not a school bus system either. And so we have discussions on all of these barriers, whether it be interpreters or transportation or other needs that we're seeing in the community, and we try to resolve those problems by applying for grants or, you know, working together with the different agencies to try to form solutions. So, and just so you guys know, that is open to the public. If anyone's ever wanting to be involved in that, anyone can come and listen in on the meetings and ask questions and volunteer their time to support that. So, yeah.
What backlash, if any, have you guys received from the community regarding like helping you guys?
Yeah. There's a number of people here that in Aberdeen that don't support what we do. At one time, Aberdeen was considered for a direct resettlement site, but we do take the community's input into consideration when making those decisions, and so, you know, it didn't feel like there was the support that was needed there. So yeah, I mean, there are many people in our community that do support the work that we do at LSS, but there are a number who don't, and you know, I'm not sure what can improve that, but all we try to do is educate and let people know what's going on and give them, you know, true, valid information and go from there. Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. Just want to make sure I'm not missing anyone. Pop your hand up higher if there. Oh, you. Thank you.
LSS was for South Dakota. Does that mean each state has its own
Yeah, so there's every state does it differently, and in some states there may be multiple agencies that do it, and some states the state government runs it, but sometimes they distribute that responsibility to an agency. And so here in South Dakota, because we have a much smaller population than a lot of states do, LSS is able to cover that completely, but yes, it varies from state to state.
Does that cause any problems that people want to transfer states at all?
You know what, the thing is, once a refugee is established here in the United States, once they're a legal resident, they can do whatever they want. And so, you know, we offer certain services, and we do expect them to stay, you know, through their orientation. We hope that they'll get a job in that community, although if they find out that their family member lives in Nebraska and has a job opportunity for them down there, that's fine, they can move down there. If we find out where they're going and they are still receiving services, we will definitely try to transfer their case over to whoever the agency is there where they're living. And if someone comes in, if they're within those first 8 months especially, we try to find out where they came from, if they come seeking services from us. But many, once they make that move to a new location, they don't really need our services if they're at that point where they're able to move. And sometimes they don't know about us either. So I do get a lot of people that, you know, once they know, they tell their friends, and then their friends come in, and, you know, one person can start kind of a domino effect. But yeah, once they're past that orientation phase, if they're not receiving cash benefits from us, typically I see people for employment, so they're going to come in if they move to Aberdeen and they're having a hard time finding employment, or maybe they're having, you know, difficulty finding housing or something like that, and I can assist with that. But the majority that have been here for more than 8 months will come to me for employment services, and other than that, I don't see very many. So, or I should say also for immigration, legal services. So, I see a lot for that, yeah. Many people think that Aberdeen is a direct resettlement site, or that we're like sneaking people in, which we're not. So that's obviously, I mean, we're not set up for that. And I couldn't do it by myself, let me tell you, if we were receiving the number of people that they think are coming here. The other, you know, I think that a lot of it is just the unknown that scares people. You know, they see a new population coming in that's not like them, and they're not sure what is going on. You know, they're not sure what those people believe or what their practices are. And I think that that's why education is so important for us to learn about the people that are coming into our community, and learning about their culture and about, you know, what they do. And also the opportunity for them to learn more about the community of Aberdeen, and how we run already. But I'm trying to think of anything else. I mean, I think that's mainly it. There's feelings of something's happening behind my back that I don't know about, you know, as in people coming in who haven't been approved to be here, and that's not the case. And then also just not understanding the cultures that are coming in. On their income? Oh, yes. Like I said, they are legally permitted to work here, and so they, just like anyone else, has to have a Social Security card to work. They have to have a Social Security card. They have to submit that to their employer, and then they pay taxes. Definitely. 5 years after they arrive, they apply for citizenship. They don't have to do it at 5 years. They can do it whenever they decide to. And it does require a very good knowledge of the English language and U.S. history and some things that I don't think we all even could necessarily pass today if we had to take the test. But a year after they arrive, they have to get their green card, their permanent residency. And after that, just 5 years or later, they're able to apply. There's a large fee, and they apply for citizenship. And at that point, there's there's tests and interviews and things that they have to do, but that's as far as I know how it works. Did anybody else have any questions? All right. Well, feel free afterwards to come talk to me if you guys have any questions. I did leave my card on the back table. If anyone wants to grab one, you're welcome to email me or call me anytime at my office there, and I'm happy to answer questions that may come up for you, or if you're seeking out volunteer opportunities or you want to get involved somehow, I'm happy to help out with that, okay? So thank you for coming.